G'day, welcome back. In this section, I want to show you a few of the skills, talk about some of the skills, rather than show you the geeky version inside of the brain. I just want to get you excited about what's possible and what you can do inside the brain and share some of the stories, what other members have been doing. Now, expert counsel was a skill that I put together towards the end of 2025. It is, as it says there, a board of advisors on demand. It's been a lot of fun. I've actually got 3 or 4. Actually, I've got one that's not even on here. So, and I put a little post on LinkedIn about this a while ago, and it went quite nuts. There's an example of this, a sort of more visual example of this on my 80/20 Brain website as well, in case you want to go have a look at that. Except that is sort of like predetermined, pre-filled. The expert brain, the expert counsel within your brain can be used for anything. So I built these first 3 levels of the counsel. There's a Google Ads counsel, then a marketing counsel, and then a business counsel. I've also since built a 4th version, which is your customer avatars. So you can create one using any kind of personas. You can add personas to these councils. Some of my mastermind members have gone to town on this and added loads and loads of different people to their councils. The idea being that we have a group of people whose opinion, knowledge, and so on we respect. And then what I've built for you, and then you can take this and run with it. I've also got a skill called the add persona to counsel skill. So you basically just give it a name, and then it goes and does what I did for all of these. It goes off and researches everything it can find that's publicly available. So I'm not using private information for this. I'm not using books that I might have bought or course material that somebody's done in order to generate their profile. Now, if you have that sort of level of detail, that would obviously be a much more powerful persona. So for example, Fred Valles is on the Google Ads council. I've just used everything I could find publicly about Fred. I haven't used the content from his excellent, I was going to say 2, I think it's 3 books now, Unlevel the Playing Field and so on. I think that would be unfair. That's his IP. I don't think it is right to use someone's IP that, yes, I've paid for it, but then I'm making that available to people that maybe haven't paid for that. Same thing with courses. Jill Saskin-Gales has some wonderful Google Ads courses. She's a member of the Google Ads Expert Council as well, but I'm not including the stuff from her that I've received because I've bought things from her. That isn't in the council. So it's just publicly facing material. But of course, if you choose the right experts, there's a lot of public facing material, YouTube, transcripts, blog posts, articles, and so on. So each of these, we've done a bunch of research, myself and 80/20 Brain, and built out personas for each of the people on here. So I've got people like Seth Godin, Hormozy, David Ogilvy. Council members don't need to still be alive. Peter Drucker. So at all levels, Google, ads, marketing, and business. And then to kick off a council session, you literally just have to say /expert council or, hey brain, run the expert council skill for me. At which point it will ask you who you want on the council, which level you want, and how many people you want to put on the council. And then I've combined that with this thinking process. This is something that was taught to me many, many years ago by a guy called Edward de Bono, a famous thinker. And this, I know he has taught this to everybody from 8-year-olds to 88-year-olds and everybody in between, boardrooms and primary schools. I love this thinking methodology. So each person puts on their metaphorical hat, and the facilitator, if we were doing this in real life, the facilitator would say, right, everybody put your white hat on now. What are the facts? And you can't say at that point, I don't like this, or I think this is crap, or whatever. No, we've got our white hats on. We're just talking about the facts right now. And everybody goes around. So everybody gets a voice, including the quiet person in the corner, and it stops that person who always takes over the discussion from really taking over the discussion. It kind of democratizes it a bit. Everybody gets a voice, but we're also changing the perspective. We're looking at the decision that we might be making, whatever's been asked of the council, through these different lenses. And then everybody puts their red hat on, and that's gut reactions. So what are your gut reactions to this? You don't have to justify it. You don't have to explain why, just gut reaction. Then we look at all the benefits, all of the risks, and what new ideas might this spark. And then the blue hat right at the end is the synthesis of all of that. That's typically in real life the facilitator's job. But all of this happens inside the brain running the skill. So it essentially, what happens behind the scenes, although you can turn this on and view it if you really want to, it kind of goes around the room, and you can do this with 4 people, you can do this with 24 people if you like, considers all of their opinions. So based on the persona of each person that it has, they know how to respond in what it thinks Seth Godin would say to that particular question, and how it applies to your business. Goes around the table, next hat, goes around the table, next hat, and on and on and on. And then the brain synthesizes all of that together and then gives you that synthesis at the end. So you describe the problem. They aren't pre-filled or anything. You get to pick whatever you might like. Many, many members have been using this for actual client problems, grabbing something that's been emailed to them, convening the expert council in the brain, dropping the client problem in, giving 30 seconds of context if required, if it isn't already in the brain. But ideally, if you set up the context for all of your clients, you could just drag a couple of additional files in. That gives the expert council lots more context about that particular business or the particular situation. You then say, right, yeah, by default, I think I set it to 6 people. If you're using a Claude plan, like the Claude Max plan, it doesn't really matter. You may as well go crazy and just put everybody on the council. But if you're on a limited plan, like the Pro plan, or certainly if you're using API credits, that's where you might want to limit the size of the council. You're then providing the facts. So we're not relying on the expert in the room to think about the facts. That's what you provide. You provide the question and some context and just the facts. You don't need to, I suppose you could, but you don't need to supply your version of all the other hats, your gut reaction, your ideas and so on. You just give it the facts. Experts deliberate around the table. The chairman, which is the brain, then synthesizes all of that together and hands you essentially the recommendation at the end. And then if you want to, you can also follow up with one or more individuals on the council. So I use Brad here as the guinea pig, who's also on the council, whereby we can then say, oh, actually, I want to follow up with Brad. Can I ask him this additional question? And so you can keep wandering down rabbit holes even after you get that first initial answer from the council. So this is not an actual, this is just purely an example. And again, it's up to you how much of this you show. If you want to, you can see everything, what every member of the council said at every step, or you can choose just to see the short version like this, or just the synthesis at the end. You get to choose that. I'll let you pause the video and read through that if you really want. It's just an example. I love this skill. Members seem to be loving it too, particularly my mastermind members who are using it in kinds of very creative and interesting ways. It's a really fun tool. I've used it many times and thought, oh, I can't afford to have Seth Godin in the room chatting to Alex Hormozy, chatting to David Ogilvy, who sadly is no longer with us. Even if he were alive, I couldn't afford to get those 3 people in the same room at the same time talking about my business. Clearly, this is not as good as having the real people, obviously. But compared to the alternative, which is not having them at all, or big bookshelf over there, reading a whole bunch of their books, trying to cram all of that knowledge into your head. I mean, why do we read business books? It's so that we can kind of think a bit like the author, be that Hormozy or Seth Godin or Rory Sutherland or Peter Drucker. That's kind of why we're absorbing those 1,000 books over there, so that we can kind of think a little bit like them. And now you have that on tap, on demand, whenever you want, essentially for free. I hope you give it a go. I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. And in the next video, let's talk about content creation. I'll see you there.